a virtuous and thinking warrior is an effective warrior, and a vicious or unthinking warrior is a liability. And the military is at its highest functioning when it cultivates individuals who are wise, just, courageous, and temperate.
This is actually one topic that I would say I haven't given enough credit throughout my, I don't know what I'm at, like 400 episodes now on the Strong Stoic, but just around military and conflict and war. And part of it's my own thing is I don't have a whole lot of experience in that other than what I've read through history. So yeah, just I'm very excited to chat with you there, William. You go by Will or William?
I go by Will in person. William is, William C. Spears is kind of the author name, because if you Google Will Spears, you're going to get a lot of questions about what Britney Spears is going to do.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah, that's incredible. So yeah, welcome, man. I'm really excited to chat with you today, and just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience here.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Brandon. And the first thing I will say is I am active duty military. And so it is important for me to say that nothing that I say here today represents any kind of official position of the U.S. government or any organization, any part of it. But I'm an active duty member of the U.S. Navy. If I don't say that disclaimer, then I will inevitably render some opinion on Taylor Swift or something, and then that'll be the Navy's opinion to somebody. And
right. We don't want that
or something. No, I'm just here as my own dumb self. So I'm an active duty Navy submarine officer. I am a commander in the Navy. I'm not a submarine commander. I have my last job at sea was as the second in command of a Trident ballistic missile submarine, or the XO. And I hope to be a submarine commander in my next sea tour. And there's a million reasons that may or may not happen. And we're moving down that track. I should be going back to that kind of pipeline this summer. At the moment, I work at the Pentagon and look at spreadsheets of how expensive ships are. I've been interested in Stoicism since I was in college. I enlisted and joined the Navy to the nuclear power program as an electrician. And I originally come from Louisiana, and after being in as an enlisted guy for a couple of years, I'm applying for all the officer programs, and then the Naval Academy took me there, and I went from there and recommissioned back into the submarine and nuclear power pipeline, and I've had a pretty good submarine career since then. I was the weapons officer of a fast attack submarine out of Hawaii, and before that, I was on a different fast attack submarine out of Guam, and so I've kind of had a lot of a lot of good experience there. I got interested in Stoicism while I was at the Naval Academy. There's kind of an undercurrent of it there, owing largely to a famous figure named Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who, you could do a whole other podcast series on him. But he, back in like the late 70s and 80s and 90s, was heavily promoting Stoicism, specifically the Stoicism of Epictetus, to any audience that would be receptive. And so, Stoicism has always had a undercurrent of interest within military culture for kind of obvious reasons, because there's just so many resonances and parallels there. But and that's kind of part of what I write about. But he was particularly emphatic about it, and I came across his writings back when I was a mechanical engineering major when I was in college. But I felt like I was getting away with something if in between classes I could go to the library and I came across his book somewhere, and I'd be reading his stuff and kind of was off to the races from there. But anyway, that's where I'm at, and that's where I am in my career, and always been interested in fitness as well. I was a power lifter in college, and now I'm a 40-something, with failing joints and having to having to learn how to adapt to that, the fact that, my body will age and there's things I can't do anymore, and dealing with that. But yeah, that's always been a big part of my life as well.
Yeah, we use quite a bit of strength training analogies here in this podcast for sure.
No
Just,
idea why,
Yeah, I don't know why. I have no idea why. But no, I've been interested in strength training since I was 14. I started like everybody, not knowing what the hell I was doing. But after God, I'm 32 now, so that's a while. That's almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
Squatting. Not always in good form, but now hopefully I think I've got
Hopefully
it down
better
pat.
form now.
Yeah,
If you haven't gotten it down now, you better get it down before you turn 40. Let me.
Yeah, time to start quitting. Yeah, for sure. But no, super interesting, and I think I've always been fascinated by like the fitness stuff because it similar to the military. There's so many natural lessons ingrained in that, that you can kind of just adopt, and you don't always have to. Which is, one of the things I want to touch on in this episode with you, because like the military is something. Maybe more so in the U.S. You're in the U.S. obviously, and I'm Canadian. In the U.S., the military is a very. It seems to have a bit more of a strong core in the public, and you guys really pride yourself on your military. And in Canada, we're more. You don't hear as much discussion around it. It seems to be like we have a smaller army, and we rely on you a lot of times at the U.S. for that kind of thing. But and we do have our own army, but we have a tenth the population. We're much smaller than you. It doesn't seem to be as much of a focus, in Canada as it might be in the U.S. So I don't know. Maybe in America people tend to think about that a bit more, but from my experience, it seems to be a topic that kind of has its own little group. And I think it's kind of a shame in some sense, because if you look back at the Stoics, I mean, Marcus Aurelius was bombarded in war campaigns his whole life. It was pretty much his whole life he was at war with barbarian tribes. And so it was a very, you read Meditations and you kind of have to remember, because he doesn't reference it a whole lot, that he's surrounded by death, disease, killing, war. Like, it's just madness. So all that to pivot, I want to throw it out to you as kind of an open-ended question. Where do you see Stoicism and the military and that philosophy around that? Where do you find the alignment in that?
Well, I mean, there are too many places to count. I've been asked, does Stoicism influence my military perspective, and does my military perspective affect my applications and interpretations of Stoicism? And yes, both of those things are true. Kind of my central thesis is that insofar as any discrete philosophy that actually exists in the world, we don't have to make a new one, but insofar as any discrete philosophy would qualify as a warrior philosophy, think kind of what the Jedi Knights fictionalized, and created in fiction. Insofar as that exists in real life, Stoicism is it. And if there is anything else out there, I'm not familiar with every single philosophy out there, but if there is anything out there that is more conducive or resonant with the military experience and the values that are typically cherished and cultivated within the military, I don't know what it is. Stoicism is it. And kind of like my writing project is laying out how and why that's true. And also kind of responding in some ways to there. You have the online debates, and you'll have pockets of people that are like, oh, the military, they have, Stoicism was this popular Stoicism, fad was doing great, and then the military found it, and now they're trying to twist it and turn it into something, where Stoics are, all about being better at killing people. And, okay, first of all, there's so many things wrong with that. For one thing, we don't want them to be bad at it if that's their job. Mm-hmm. But, additionally, the military discovered Stoicism long before Silicon Valley did. And, it's been resonant within military culture for some 2,000 years. But also, the military isn't just a bunch of people who want to go around killing people. The particular hill I'll die on or position I will not abandon is that a virtuous and thinking warrior is an effective warrior, and a vicious or unthinking warrior is a liability. And there are so many reasons we could go into that, but the military is at its highest functioning when it cultivates individuals who are wise, just, courageous, and temperate.
Mhm.
Like that is what you want in a warfighter. And people will say, "Oh, well, what about like aggression and bloodthirstiness and these things? Like, wouldn't that make a good warrior?" And it's like, well, when you see that to an unusual degree in a recruit, you're like, "Whoa, okay, we got to watch that guy."
Mhm.
Like that guy probably needs some more training. He's about to cause an atrocity, and and to say nothing of the moral implications of that, he's going to set our strategic objectives back, a decade. So, those are the kinds of points I try to make, is that a virtuous warrior is an effective warrior, period. And the military profession does seek to cultivate virtue in individuals, and that's what you want in a military profession. That's kind of part of my ambition, is trying to influence young warfighters and say, like, hey, you guys are attracted to Stoicism because you want to be badass, but what you are really going after here, what I want you to take away, is that virtue is what you're after. And what's more badass than realizing that all these cosmetic things that I was once attracted to, status and praise and vanity and all these things, are just vanity. They're just trinkets. Money, like that's a higher level of thinking, and that's a plane you want to get to where you can dismiss all these vanities as vanities, and as trivialities, as externalities. Epictetus says, they're scattering nuts and figs. Let the children chase nuts and figs, but men don't do that, and that's the mentality that we want to bring.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So many ways we could detour on that. I do want to make the point because when you say virtue, a lot of people, especially newcomers to Stoicism, might think, just kind of be like a nice person. But virtue is like discipline, humility, strength, camaraderie. Because one of the things I've just reading accounts of history in war times is just the camaraderie that exists between soldiers in a unit, and it feels like, just reading these accounts of people when they're in these battles, in these war times, that they externalize themselves. Like they completely let go of their ego, and they start doing things for the greater good of that group. And so they're no longer a self. They're something much bigger than a self. And now that can be taken too far, where you consider your enemy to be like something that's not even human. And that's an extreme. And it's interesting because, like, Marcus Aurelius, he talks about human beings being, these rows of teeth that work together. But if you think about that imagery of human teeth, what you have is conflict, right? Teeth work through conflict. I'm reading a fiction book right now, and it's a very gory, but the one of the guys got his teeth removed. On the upper row of his teeth, he was tortured, and he had every second tooth removed. And in the bottom of his mouth, he had the opposite teeth removed. And it was like this psychological thing of like, I have half my teeth, but I can't chew because I have no conflict. And so that imagery of that Marcus Aurelius speaks to, a lot of people think, well, teeth are working together in harmony, but no, there's conflict there. There's conflict between teeth, and that's how things, the cosmos actually moves forward. And so I want to steer you a little bit towards this idea of conflict, and how, in the military sense, because you could say the military and war and that area is kind of the extreme of that. Like it doesn't go too much more past that. You literally have different tribes of human beings fighting each other, killing each other on different sides for different reasons. And so how do you think about that idea of conflict in the military in relationship to Stoicism?
Well, tabling Stoicism for a second, we hope not to be fighting all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're doing things right, then our aspect is kind of the hard end of the greater foreign policy instrument of a country. But if the diplomats are doing their things right, then navies, for instance, can just be a method in which nation states communicate with each other. And you're not firing your missiles. Okay, I work on a Trident missile submarine. That's my background. We hope to live in a world where those missiles are not being fired.
Right.
But the weapons are being used every day that they shape the decision space of world leaders. So you've got that, and that's this whole like concept of deterrence and the morality of deterrence, which is a very deep rabbit hole you could go into. A lot of people will flag, the military parallel with Stoicism as being this conflict because Stoics were cosmopolitans, and what that means, if anyone's not familiar with that in your listenership, is citizen of the cosmos or citizen of the world, basically world citizens. But that doesn't mean that they're not also citizens of their countries as well. I don't cease to, I don't cease to be a member of my family because I'm a member of my country. I do owe different things to my son than I do to my nephew. That does not mean that either of them are less human, than the other. But so the Stoic cosmopolitanism does not does not necessarily imply pacifism. Pacifism, even the most pro-social philosophers in the world are still not hard pacifists. It's very rare to find one that is, and you will find zero policymakers that are hard pacifists for the very good reason that that hard pacifism doesn't survive contact with reality. The real world is infinitely more complex, and then so you end up with necessity for guys like me, and that that sucks, but that's the world we live in. I personally reject the notion that war is just this intrinsic thing, part of human nature that's always going to be there, that we can never outgrow. Like I don't think it's more intrinsic to human nature than something like monarchy or slavery. I think it can be outgrown, but you need institutions to do it, and you need education to do it, and we're not there yet. I think we're probably on track in the long term, but it's probably going to be functions of trade and things like that get us there. Anyway, that's a huge tangent. The point that I'm making is people will say, okay, well, Stoic cosmopolitan values imply that military would be contradictory to Stoicism. It's like, no, it wouldn't. I mean, maybe we can ask Marcus Aurelius from the battlefield how he feels about that. But what it really implies is that all wars would be viewed like civil wars. Every fellow human is still a member of the same country that I am on that higher plane of this cosmic country. And what that does is that implies a lot of obligations on me on how I treat that other opposite combatant, and that gets into just war theory and what's called jus in bellum and all these things. I cannot view that person as non-human. I cannot view that person as fodder to be destroyed for no reason. And my aim should ultimately be the securing of a just and lasting peace. Those are all huge rabbit holes that libraries have been written on through time. But conflict is, basically absent institutions and absent development, absent education, conflict is absolutely a part of human nature. But unfortunately, being prepared and ready for it is a part of averting it. And a lot of that is dependent on the wisdom and virtue of your policymakers, to whom I answer. I'm responsible to answer.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I hope that kind of opens it up for you.
Yeah. No, I love that. No, I think you're absolutely right. Like the conflict being an inherent part of human experience, but conflict can exist in many different formats. Like now, as we quote quote get more civilized, I don't use that. I try and be humble with that term, but conflict over time seems to take more of the form of verbal conflict. You have conflict at any workplace in between different departments, because different departments have competing desires, and there's going to be a little bit of inherent conflict, which overall steadies the organization and hopefully makes it better. Like, there's always some kind of purpose for conflict. But yeah, I mean, anyone who says that a Stoic is a pacifist, I mean, look at the history of Stoicism. And I think, like, if you were to bring this down to, a bit like an example that maybe most people could kind of resonate with, if you're out in public with your family, and there's someone that's coming towards your family, and they look dangerous, and then all of a sudden they start to come at you and try and hurt your family. Your role there is very clear as a Stoic. It's protect the family. If you can get them out, get them the hell out, and you get out as well. But if you're in a situation where you can't, you have to defend. Like, you have to pick something up. You have to fight. And I want to point that towards something that I find very interesting about conflict. How do you think about it in terms of, like, the emotions of it? Because one of the interesting things I've found with conflict, when I started getting into a position in my profession where it starts to become an everyday part of my life, like every day now I have conflict just in the role I am in. Are you ever going to get to a place where conflict, it just doesn't have any real feeling? Like, it's an indifferent thing, right? I remember being bothered by a particular thing of conflict, and I talked to a good friend of mine, and he said, well, yeah, it's conflict. Like, of course you're going to feel upset and pissed off sometimes. Like, that's just the nature of it. So how do you think about that in terms of the emotional state in this context?
Yeah. Well, I can say what the Stoics would say about it. The Stoics acknowledge there are good emotions, and there are rational emotions that make sense. What makes an emotion rational, if it is one, is that it follows from a correct judgment about something, about what is truly good, and so joy in the presence of my companions, and joy in fulfilling my duty, and things like that would be considered rational emotions, and they don't necessarily have to be positive. Caution is an emotion. If I'm near something that is rationally to be avoided, then caution would be a rational alternative to fear. So those are all rational emotions, but I'm also often asked, well, what about anger? Wouldn't anger be useful in combat? And the Stoics are very clear on this, and I agree with them that no,
Yeah.
no, anger is not. I would much rather do the appropriate thing without this complicating factor of anger. And so think about it like I'm a prize fighter. So do I want to be this prize fighter that gets pissed off, or do I want my opponent to get pissed off so he makes mistakes and I can crush him? Now extrapolate that onto something, like the military profession. So I'm a submarine warfare officer. So say I'm a weapons officer. I'm there trying to, calculate a firing solution on this target. And, my world, it's very, very cerebral, so I've got to calculate this target's bearing, range, course, and speed, and figure out how to employ a weapon and get the, deliver the weapon to target, and, in an uncertain, foggy submarine, combat scenario. Do I want to be angry in that scenario? Is that going to help? No.
Yeah.
I want to be as calculating as possible and unemotional as possible, so that I calculate the firing solution correctly and dispassionately. So to the extent that I can have the correct judgments about things, such that these complicating, irrational emotions are not a part of it, that is what I want to cultivate. How do I cultivate that? I habituate the habits, just like in the military, you habituate the habits of thought, and the heuristic you use is the term muscle memory, and as you know, as a fitness guy, there's more to muscle memory than that just being a term. It has to do with nervous patterns and things like that. But the more that I exercise formality in my communications on my watch team, the more that I run these drills and I go through these motions, and I know how to push this button after this button, and to sound off with this firing litany correctly, then it just becomes more and more automatic, and I don't have to devote cognitive resources to execute that procedure, and then it's just going to be calculated. And that's what you want. You want to be completely dispassionate, and especially when you're in the face of danger. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer. And I think, the whole anger piece, I've struggled with that too with Stoicism. Like I've wrestled with that idea of anger, and especially in my my baby Stoic days, I call them. But if you think about what the Stoics really, the fundamental idea is your rational mind. You have to use your rational mind, and this is your divine connection with divinity and the cosmos and everything else. And anger clouds your rational judgment. Now, when people hear that, a lot of people remove emotion from the equation, but rationality and reason and emotion, they're not two sides of the same, like they're not like completely separate. I was talking to one gentleman, and he was a psychologist, and I can't remember who it was, but he was telling me that this whole rationality, reason, and emotion, we think about them as separate, but really they're two parts of the same structure, and so they build upon each other. Yeah, all that to say, it's you definitely want to, as much as you can, make sure that you're controlling your anger and ideally mitigating it, but that's a very challenging thing. So conflict, war, in these situations, sorry, you got a comment?
So just you triggered something. There are scenarios that might be in like in leadership scenarios where maybe it's prudent to present anger. Maybe that is
Yes.
the most effective method for me to communicate something that needs to be communicated instantly and effectively. Say I have a sailor that violated electrical safety or something like that, and puts himself and others at risk. Or maybe a sailor says something racist, or cops a feel on a shipmate or something like that. Like and I witnessed that there are situations where I should express anger,
Right.
to communicate what needs to be communicated as effectively and efficiently as possible. But in an ideal world, I would basically be faking it,
Yeah.
In the real world where we're human beings, maybe that is, maybe I'm going to be a little bit angry about that thing. But the point is, it's important to conceptually separate the idea that I need that anger to motivate me to do the right thing. And, a lot of people will say, well, anger can be good because it motivates us to fight for justice or do this thing. Like, well, what would be better is to fight for justice anyway, or take all the appropriate actions without this complicating factor. And that's what you want to aim at. Anyway, you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And to give another example of that, Jocko Willink talks about how when you have someone on your team, they come to you and they're venting. He said the worst thing you can do there as a leader is be perfectly calm. It's like you need to de-escalate, but you need to meet them in the middle, because if you don't, they feel like you're not taking them seriously. And so I've always found that very interesting, and it gets to the point that you're saying, and it's not, I don't like the word fake because it sounds ingenuine. It's like, as a Stoic, everything's role based. So like you have to play the role that you're assigned. It's like a play. Like literally, Stoicism is like a play. I am at work right now. I am in this position doing this XYZ. Therefore, this is how I try and act. This is the ideal that I want to maintain, given everything here. So yeah, no, man, that's a great example.
I think in the modern day we would call that emotional intelligence. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that the Stoics would agree, a Stoic sage or perfectly wise person would not be cold and emotionally incompetent in that
Right.
they would know how to express themselves. And Epictetus even talks about that whenever he's talking about consoling a grieving friend. If your friend's child dies, you don't tell them, well, that was actually good because the universe, is fate, and you've truly lost nothing. Like, no, that's probably not what you should say to your grieving friend.
Right.
And there you can have infinite variations and distinct, different opinions on what an ideal human being looks like, but one who is cold and emotionally incompetent and haughty or overly judgmental, any of those things are not it in any philosophy or any era. An ideal human being in any of these times and from any of these perspectives is going to be someone who is emotionally competent and knows how to interact with human beings as if they were human beings.
Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. No, 100%. I've always said you have to meet people where they are, and a lot of times your team. I mean, you as the leader, you're supposed to be the person that, you're not going to have all the answers, but you are supposed to be someone who's setting the example and setting the standard. And what that looks like, especially from like an emotional perspective, it is like it's a tightrope sometimes, but there is a balance there where yes, you have to set a standard at the same time as being compassionate to the degree that you can understand your team. Because if you lose that connection, you end up you're basically a robot. You're basically someone who I go in with my issues, they give me a calm answer, but they clearly cannot understand my challenges, because if they did, they would have some kind of emotional reaction to back that up. So that's awesome.
And you're going to be ineffective in your role.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love that, man. It's it really challenges the notion of Stoics being unemotional. Because anyone who says that, like, have you met a Stoic? Like, because all the Stoics I've met, they're not necessarily neurotic. Sometimes they are, and they're not like overly expressive. But to say that they're emotionless, it's an inaccurate representation of who they are.
Yeah, no one's emotionless.
No.
You shouldn't want to be emotionless. You should just want to have rational emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on one idea that you alluded to earlier, which I found interesting. You were talking about how, more from a global perspective, on how, we have to be militarily ready, right? And ideally, we don't use it, but we have to have it there. And it reminded me of a Bible verse that Jordan Peterson talked quite a bit about. The meek shall inherit the world. Are you familiar with that?
I am. Yeah.
So, are you familiar with it?
I'm not familiar with Peterson's talk on it.
Sure. Okay.
I've seen Jordan Peterson, but I don't know what he had to say about that verse.
So I don't know if this is true. I didn't do the research myself. But his point here, and it doesn't particularly matter, but his point here on that phrase, the meek shall inherit the earth. You think meek, you think weak, right? You think, too humble and all that, and avoiding conflict. But he claims to have traced the origin of that word all the way back, and it actually means something more like those who have swords but choose to keep them sheathed. And so that's the Stoic thing there. And it's not necessarily that you always keep them sheathed, but the point of having strength, especially in peacetime. I mean, you need it. You need it when times are rough. The world's going to bring it out of you then. But having that strength in peacetime, having the sword, but keeping it sheathed, choosing to, as much as you can, relying on things like diplomacy and peace talks and just different ways of going about it, avoiding flat out physical violence. And so, what does that resonate with you in particular on that topic? And you can talk about it from the global perspective, or even like as an individual Stoic.
Well, gosh, that's a huge rabbit hole. But you get into civil military relations and again, deterrence policies and things like that. It is not my role to evaluate or to weigh in on the judgments of what the policymakers want to do. I hope that they want to do wise things, and if something that they do is too wise or too abhorrent, at some point I come into conflict with my humanity, and my roles come into conflict, and I have to defer to the higher role of a reasoning human and say, I'm not going to do that, and I will go to jail if that's what that means, But we're not anywhere near that, and I've never experienced that. But my role is to ensure that when the policymaker pulls the trigger, a bullet comes out of the gun, and I need to be very, very good at making sure that bullet comes out of the gun. So I think that there's a lot of value in looking at things from the perspective of roles. Epictetus is very good at this and how he lays out the role ethics of a human being. I have specific obligations as a citizen, as a brother, as a son, as a father. And those things aren't necessarily the same sets of obligations, but and I can't escape any of those roles that I have. And I may each one of those roles is going to imply different things, but I can seek a through line. And that through line can help me navigate the various moral dilemmas that I encounter. And the military profession is moral dilemmas all the way down. I mean, that's what it is. It is a profession of moral dilemmas. You see Marcus Aurelius doing this when he says, as Antonius, Antonius is what he called himself or identified as Antonius, I am Marcus, and I'm a citizen of Rome. But as a human being, I'm a citizen of the cosmos. But what is good for me must be good for both communities. So you see, he's finding a through line, and he identifies his, and this is back in a long time ago, before we had discussions of colonizing and all the, the moral perils moral hazards that are implied in all these things. From his perspective, Rome is a civilizing agent of the world, and it's either the civilization of Rome or anarchy and barbarians. And so where he sees his role is, what is good for Rome is, if it is expressed and governed prudently, is good for the universe. And finding that through line can help reconcile a lot of these internal conflicts. Now, Epictetus would say, whatever my specific role is, whether that is, brother, son, warrior, whatever it is, I've always got the primary role of being a reasoning human being. And so there is no such thing as a villain role in Stoicism. There's no identification or accommodation of that. So like, let's say my role is to be one of those guys that calls little old ladies and cons them out of their life savings over the phone. Like, well, that would be illegitimate role. That would conflict with my primary role as a reasoning human being. I would argue that being a warrior does not conflict with that, because it's a necessary role. We can't just, all the warriors can't just quit. Like that
Right.
that would be counterproductive, and you would end up with more anarchy and worse outcomes if that happened. So I hope that helps lay it out a little bit. But I think that if you look into the Stoicism specifically as articulated well by Epictetus, the reference to roles is very helpful, and always with reference to and primacy to the primary role of being a reasoning human being, which implies virtue. No role can contradict virtue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the roles topic, because it seems to get under discussed in Stoicism, that you have this role, and I think when you think about it in that way, to your point, I think it solves a lot of the conundrums you have, because a lot of people feel like it's ingenuine or fake, or I'll even say like you're an imposter, which sometimes you are when you step into a new role, because you're not sure where you lie here. You mentioned sometimes you have to, for lack of a better word, fake a bit of emotion to do your role properly. And I think about whenever you take on a new role in life, be it even like a partner or a husband or a wife or a father or something at work, there is that stage of imposter syndrome where your ego, your psychology is basically your conscience is adapting to this new role that you've chosen to take on. And for a brief period, you kind of are an imposter. Like you kind of are, to your point, you kind of are faking it a little bit because in your head you can conceptualize what this role is and what it requires. But practically, where you are as an individual, you're not there yet. And so there's this gap between, it's like the actor that's in the play and he knows his role, but he doesn't feel comfortable on stage yet, right? And so eventually, with enough practice and enough time, they become the actor that is for that play. They're no longer faking it. They're no longer an imposter. Like they are if they're playing Marcus Aurelius in a play, like they are Marcus Aurelius for that hour. They're no longer some imposter.
And well, that's like you just described the whole profession of being a naval officer, and it's not necessarily fake it till it's fake it till you become it,
Right.
But you've got to play your part for a little while, and it's almost like hazing whenever you show up as you're fresh out of college and you're a newly commissioned ensign and you show up to the ship and you get told go take over reactor control division and you're like, oh, what? Which way is that? It's aft, it's that way, okay. And okay, guys, I'm in charge. And they're all like, okay, this guy's in charge, and like, they know you don't know anything,
Right.
you don't know anything, but you've got a role to play and they don't want you, the individual operators, they don't want you to come in and just be like, okay, I don't know anything. What's going on? You guys are actually in charge of the, that's going to be ineffective. It's going to cause chaos and it's going to make everyone's life suck. It's going to make the whole organization run poorly. But if you say, okay, I am your division officer and, chief, the division chief, you're going to be my principal advisor. And I'm not going to just do everything you say. I'm not going to have no spine or no will or no agency in this, but I'm going to learn everything I can immediately. And I'm going to probably defer to your recommendations until I get my feet under me. And everyone wants that. And,
Right.
Including the juniorist operator, because they want the organization to run smoothly. And they understand that is what your role is. And that kind of hazing experience almost of like, hey, go take over this division knowing nothing is training you to be able to sort chaos and turn chaos into order when you're at an information disadvantage, which is what the entire role of being, a military leader is being able to turn chaos into order when you're at an information disadvantage.
Yeah, no, I love that example, man. And I think it gives people, hopefully, it gives me a bit of courage in going into new roles. Because I remember when I was a young professional and I used to look at like managers and directors, and I always just had it in my head that they're ready and then they take on a bigger role and it's like, yeah, giddy up, let's rock and roll. But that's not been my experience in my profession. Like my experience has always been, I'm at most 50% ready for a new role. Like at most, because there's so much of it you don't know, you don't see. You see it from your perspective, but you can't really see it from that higher perspective until you actually get there. And so you don't want to take on Epictetus has a line where he says, if you take on a role that is too difficult or above you, you're shaming yourself, is what he says, right?
You're likely to disgrace yourself in that role.
Yeah, it's disgrace.
And
that's what he says.
Yeah, and when he's talking about the opportunity cost, like if it's not a role that's suited to you, then maybe you should have been doing something else and
Right.
are forfeiting, the contribution that you would make in this other role that's more appropriate to you.
Yeah, 100%. So it is a hard balance, and I think in things like the military and any organizational structure, you have to rely somewhat on the judgment of your boss or your new boss, the structure of your organization to have some idea of where you are in your current development and when you're ready to take on that new, like when you have enough foundation in your current role to keep you stable in your next role, right? And so hopefully you have good enough leaders that can manage that. But life's not always going to give that to you, right? And you see this sometimes. People have children when they're clearly not ready financially, emotionally, in any sense of the word, and it's unfortunate. In some situations, it results in poor parenting and that, and so there is a balance there. So I don't know. It's like, how do you know that? Like, I know that's a very difficult question, but how do you know in any sense if you're ready or if you're
suited for the role that you're in? I mean, you don't. Epictetus talks about, surely you would know if you have an exceptional role, but what he's talking about there is like if you think that you are so special that you don't need to conform to this norm or something like that, like I'm a special prodigy or something like that, then and if you doubt that, then you're probably not, and you're probably just rationalizing to yourself. So in a lot of ways you're not going to know, but especially like in a professional, the military is really good at this, at like pushing you into situations where you're uncomfortable, and you very well may tell yourself, oh, I'm not suited for this. Isn't for me. I'm not suited for this. When in fact, you're just uncomfortable and you're not used to being outside of your comfort zones. And that's part of why, that's part of the military career, being good at inculcating being used to being uncomfortable and being
Right.
used to situations where you're at an information disadvantage and getting comfortable with that and operating confidently, and being able to seek the right information and being able to quickly recognize who's got it and who are the advisors I can trust, and instead of just saying like, oh, I don't know anything, I'm not suited to this, and this isn't for me. Like, you're on a submarine, it's not for anyone.
Yeah.
Like, this is a metal machine. Humans aren't supposed to live here, but here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I know, in those situations when you take on a new role and you have to trust someone, like elements of your team, sometimes you make poor decisions. Sometimes you don't trust the right people, and sometimes that kind of bites you too. And you just put your head down and go through that and learn from it, and that's all you can really do. But to your point, and we can kind of bring this down to a great example of like in the gym. Like, your role in anything is to hold tension, right? And it kind of gets to this idea of conflict too. I have captains who report into me, and they have a lot on their plate. They're responsible for the life, health, safety of their crew, and when things go wrong, they sometimes they can go wrong, and they naturally, like anyone else in a challenging position, they get bothered by that. By that weight that they have to carry. And sometimes just telling people that is your role. Like that is why, you're in the position you are in, to hold that tension. It's not a bug. Like, there's nothing wrong with what's going on right now. Like, you're feeling the weight of your role. Similar to when you pick up a squat bar. Like, no one's surprised when you pick up a squat bar that it's heavy and your knees are a little wobbly. You understand this is the role, to hold tension right now. So
this is what you were made for.
Yeah, exactly.
Or this is what your role is made for. Your purpose is not to sit here under your your comfortable blankets and not get out of bed. Is that what you're made for? Yeah. There's so many parallels there that we could go in any direction. But with any kind of position of responsibility like that, if you're not stressed, you're probably not doing it right. Just like if you're doing if you're trying to do a heavy deadlift and it doesn't hurt to some degree, or you don't walk away from that a little feeling it, then you probably weren't really accomplishing anything. And
right. Yeah, and I think the mirror of that is the importance of rest, which is another thing that, as I know you're big into fitness. As an athlete, you have to very quickly learn and accept and appreciate the importance of rest. And it's the same in any other role you take. It's like, this is the problem with having young children, because they don't give you any rest. Like
No,
for the
they
first, like they're
don't.
up all night, and it's just so you're thrust into this role that's challenging, and you don't have any break from that role to allow you
Yeah.
to recover. You know?
You got to find completely new patterns, and you do, and you know,
Yeah.
you talked about how a lot of times you have people who are, you know, end up becoming parents when they weren't planning for it, and struggle with that. Well, you know, people have been becoming parents when they weren't planning on it for a hot minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
One might say it's a feature and not a bug of the species. The thing with, you know, having kids now, you know, I've got my oldest is 12, and like there's so many patterns that have changed, but you find new patterns,
Right.
and you have to figure it out, you have to make your priorities. So you know, like I used to love video games when I was in my 20s, and then when I'm in 30s, I'm a parent and I don't have time for video games anymore, and I just had to accept that. It's like, well, I can either be fit or I can be a gamer, but I can't be both. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna be fit, you know, and I can either write philosophy or be a gamer, but I can't do both. And so, okay, I'm gonna do this, and that's just a decision. But now that I've gotten a little bit older, my kids are now old enough to play games with me, and so that could be a thing that we do. You know, I'm not gonna stay up at night playing games myself. You know, I just don't have room for that in my life anymore. But sitting down and hanging out with my kid and say, hey, let me kick your ass and smash for a minute, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it's very soon that it'll be that equation's going to be flipped. But you know, for right now, we can play, and it can be a thing we do together, and that's great, you know.
Yeah. I like the
But
quote.
you find new patterns is the point.
You do, yeah. I like the quote that you can have anything you want, but not everything you want, right? So like a lot of parents in that situation, they might have played video games and then gotten overweight and out of shape, and that's a choice they made, right? So you can play video games, or you can be in shape, or you can be a parent. You can't necessarily have everything you want, and I think that's, to your point, and this is underlying theme here. Sometimes our roles, because of the nature of them, prioritize, like really get in our heads what the priorities are in our life. Because until you're stressed, like if you work 20 hours a week and you don't have any obligations other than that, you're going to waste a lot of time. And that's just the
Yeah.
truth. You're going to be scrolling on Facebook. You're going to be, just hanging out with friends for hours at a time. And there's a place for everything, for most things in life. But to what degree, and to what priority, and to what time limit, and to which place in your overall schedule. And so it's not that you want to take on so many roles that you force this prioritization. You want to be careful on the roles you choose to take on.
And
But it is important.
everybody thinks that they're working so hard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
You know, everybody thinks that there's not really, I don't have any room for anything else. Let me doom scroll and comment about that. Like, give me a break. You
Yeah.
know, everyone thinks that they're working as hard as they can. My experience on a submarine has proved me that, one absolutely can work every waking moment of their life. Like that's absolutely a thing. And, if you're not doing that, you've probably got some spare capacity, and you could probably give something up and go get under a squat bar,
Right.
Anyway, I don't know what got me off on that, but one of the things I'll comment on a comment I react negatively to, whether it's junk food or doom scrolling or whatever, is, I need this for my mental health. Like, you need sleep. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what you need for your mental health. Okay, because like, I need this vice for my mental health, can rationalize literally anything.
Anything.
And people, you see it every day. People rationalize everything with that excuse, and they're crippling themselves with that mentality, and they're really limiting their potential with that mentality of, I need this for my mental health. What you need is sleep, and maybe a little bit of exercise, and that's where you should get your dopamine. But you exercise discipline in little things, and it's going to lend itself to exercising discipline in bigger things, and that is going to have pro-social implications. So a good example of that, like, let's say, I'm walking my ship as the executive officer, and I walk by a pool of oil, or tools strewn about the deck somewhere. If I don't say anything about that, if I don't do anything about that, I've just affirmed a new lower standard for what it means, to be a sailor on the ship. And I can't escape that responsibility. I can't escape the ripple effects of my action or inaction in this situation. There's it's part of where I am. We exist in a social context. We are interlinked, and no matter what, I can't escape it. So I have to be intentional about my actions. And likewise, if I'm walking down the street and, there's a homeless person over here who's having a seizure, and I lock my vision forward and say, this isn't my situation. Well, I will have just affirmed a new and lower standard for what it means to be a human being on Earth. And I will have just done my part to contribute to a community, a world in which, empathy is for suckers. And I can't escape that responsibility. So these things play into each other, and they're inherently connected. And that's part of what I look for in philosophy, and how I judge a specific or discrete philosophy as being sound or not, is how much its various imperatives cohere and work together instead of produce contradictions. And I think Stoicism is very good for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Stoicism, it's like when you're new to the philosophy, it does seem to have some contradictions, but contradictions can also be, to the untrained eye, just paradoxes. And there are many paradoxes in Stoicism as well, right? And and really it's paradox is kind of like a conflict of ideas. Like, it gets back to this idea of like opposing forces making everything steadier. So no, I love that example of just kind of real life. It's interesting. Like, nobody really thinks about it in that way. You go out and you choose to be unkind in a situation where kindness is appropriate, and to your point, you're lowering the standard of yourself and of humanity.
Epictetus talks about, he uses the analogy of soldiers and sailors, when he's talking about role ethics, and he's saying, it's not for everyone to stand watch. One person has to stand the watch, another person has to dig the trench, another person has to do this other thing. But an important part of that passage is, if you don't do those things, if you don't do what it is your responsibility to do, then consider the effect that you're having on the army and the effect of everyone else. He always comes back to the effect of everyone else. You can't escape it. You are, what you say, everything that you do is some form of communication, and that is some form of training of everyone that's around you. And you have influence whether you want it or not.
Yeah, and I think that's the wisdom piece, is knowing your role, especially like lower down in the hierarchy, like, as we have deckhands and cooks and stuff that play a very, very, very important role in the operation of a ship. Like, vital, just a different role, but just as important as any other role. It's really important. And I think as long as you can have the wisdom to connect that to the greater whole, that's the piece. That's the important piece. Some organizations are filled with meaningless work, and that, I tell you,
not the military. No, we have no meaningless work in the military.
Yeah, that breeds some challenges, and sometimes in the extreme resentment. But yeah, just connecting the importance of your role. Like, you are here no matter what you're doing. I mean, that's the wonderful thing I like about capitalism, because if someone's paying you for a job, there's some use for it. Now, it could be virtuous, it could not be, right? You have to be wise enough to discern. But you're doing something valuable, and as long as you can align that with virtue, hey, giddy up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
Cool, man. We're coming up on an hour, so that flew by. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to promote your book, promote yourself. Where do people go to find you? What social medias do you use, if any?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me if someone wants to communicate with me. I've got a website, williamcspears.com. My book is called Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy. It is, I will tell you, it's not for everyone. It probably shouldn't be anyone's first book on Stoicism. It's more of the book for someone who has become interested in Stoicism and wants to dig deeper. And I am basically presenting, if I got tasked by an admiral, like, hey, Commander Spears, go figure out this Stoicism thing and like report back. I'm going to, dig the references. I'm going to pull out the books and say like, okay, what did the Stoics actually say about all these things? And I'm going to lay it out. And that's the book, it's in Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. It's wherever you get books. But I don't want anyone to go get it and be disappointed. Like that's not what I want. So it's not a light read, but but if you're interested in Stoicism and you want to see it laid out in kind of a military resonant fashion, I think it's the only book that does that well. But really, I'm very happy to communicate with people. If anyone wants to reach out to me and talk about this stuff more, I'd love to talk to you more about this kind of. I can nerd out on it all day. I don't get to talk about it at work. When you walk around the Pentagon and you're like, oh, Epictetus had a really good point about this. They're like, get that guy out of this room.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, man. You got to just say somebody. I heard this quote once. It was something like this, and just don't say Epictetus. That's a red flag in public.
Yeah, one thing I'll leave your listeners with is just kind of like the thing I like to sign with is a really good point that Cicero made. Now, Cicero he's a Roman, he was actually not formally a Stoic. He was a Roman statesman who studied the Stoics, and he's our source for a lot of really, he wrote a ton of stuff because he was a political philosopher, and his work on duties has been studied in especially in the military since the printing press. But one of the points that he made is riffing off of Socrates, he would go around doing the Socrates thing, saying, what is good? What is justice? And in his discussions of what is good, he arrived at, he demonstrated through his inquiry that, good is that which is both honorable and useful. Okay. So Cicero later and I like Cicero as a model for how to approach Stoicism, because he is ultimately his own guy. He doesn't say I'm a Stoic. He says, I'm me, and but he's an eclectic. He adopts whatever philosophies he thinks are, reflect reality and reflect truth. And I think that's the way we should all approach it. I think it's the only philosophically honest way to approach philosophy. So Cicero says, well, we know Socrates said that which is honorable, or that which is honorable and useful is what's good. But if one really has understanding, that which is truly honorable is useful, and that which is truly useful is honorable. Those concepts are inextricable. And likewise, that which is not truly honorable is not truly useful. And I think that applies to so many things in life, whether it's running an organization or running your body, and when he's saying honorable, he means good and respectable and just, and all those things are wrapped up in that. It's not just about the pride sense of honor, that which is honorable encompasses all of those concepts of virtue. And if it is not honorable, it is not useful. And you're going to regret it someday. It might be on your deathbed, but you're going to regret it someday. And as an organization, that speaks to running, a view of the long term versus the short term. And I think that is a success separator for many organizations and many leaders. There's just so many applications of that view. And it ultimately is the appeal to coherency and the test of philosophical validity. If our views are coherent and they work well together, then they might be sound, and if they're not coherent, then they are unsound. And so that is what I would leave your listeners with, and as just a thought that I think is constructive.
That's a wonderful place to end. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me aboard.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have a part 2 for sure. It's we got some unexplored territory, I think. So awesome. All right, until next time, man. Cheers.
All right. Yeah, take care, Brandon.